Picture this, you are 5 years old, sitting cross-legged on your bedroom floor. But you are not playing with the colorful toys scattered around you. Instead, you are staring up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of why everything feels so heavy. Why does your laughter seem to echo too loudly in the silence? Why does that silence feel like it is crushing your tiny chest? You can't put words to it yet, but you feel it, this invisible weight pressing down on your world. Maybe it is the way your parents' voice turns cold when they're stressed. Maybe it is the muffled arguments seeping through thin walls at night. Maybe it is simply the absence of something you desperately need, but can't even name. What you don't realize is that your young brain is recording everything. Every moment of confusion, every surge of unexplained fear, every time you feel too much or too little, it is all being filed away in your nervous system like a blueprint for how the world works. Fast forward 20 years. That same person now sits in their car after work, hands gripping the steering wheel, feeling that familiar heaviness creeping in. Without thinking, they reach for something, anything, that can quiet the noise in their head. A drink, a pill, endless scrolling through their phone, or maybe diving headfirst into work, until they're too exhausted to feel. Here is what most people don't understand. Addiction isn't the real problem, it is the solution. The solution to a pain that was never properly addressed in the first place. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is just another excuse, making session, let me share something that completely shifted how I understand human behavior. After diving deep into the psychology of addiction and analyzing thousands of case studies, I discovered something that changes everything about how we view this struggle. Addiction isn't a moral failing or a lack of willpower. It is often a brilliant adaptation to unbearable circumstances that happened when someone was too young to process them properly. Let me blow your mind with this. Trauma doesn't always look like what you see in movies. It is not just about dramatic events like abuse or loss. Sometimes, the most damaging trauma is what psychologists call developmental trauma. The things that didn't happen when they should have. The hug you needed but never received. The reassurance that never came when you were scared. The feeling of safety that was supposed to be your birthright, but somehow got lost along the way. Children's brains are like super absorbent sponges, soaking up not just what happens to them, but what doesn't happen for them. When a child's emotional needs go unmet, their nervous system gets stuck in what scientists call a threat state. And here is the kicker. That state doesn't just disappear when you blow out 18 candles on a birthday cake. Your brain has one primary job: keep you alive. And when emotional pain feels life-threatening, which it literally does to a child's developing nervous system, your brain will search desperately for anything that provides relief. This is where substances, behaviors, and patterns that we later call addictive enter the picture. Think about it this way. If you were drowning and someone threw you a rope, would you stop to analyze whether it was the perfect rope? Of course not. You'd grab onto it with everything you had. That is exactly what happens with addiction. It is the rope your brain grabs onto when it feels like it is drowning in unprocessed pain. But here is where the science gets absolutely fascinating. Neuroscientists have discovered that when children experience chronic stress or emotional neglect, their brains literally develop differently. The stress hormone, cortisol, floods their developing systems more frequently than nature intended, rewiring crucial circuits, especially the dopamine pathways that govern motivation and reward. Dopamine is your brain's way of saying, "This feels good, do it again." But in children who grow up with unresolved trauma, these pathways become disrupted. Normal pleasures like connection, play, or small achievements don't light up their reward circuits the way they should. So when that person encounters alcohol, drugs, gambling, or even something as seemingly harmless as social media, their brain suddenly explodes with activity. It is like their reward system has been waiting their entire life for this moment of relief. This isn't weakness, it is neurobiology. The same brain that once adapted to survive emotional chaos is now trying to regulate itself, the only way it knows how. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to carry this invisible sadness? Even when they're smiling, they might be successful, funny, the life of the party. But if you look closely, you can see it in their eyes, that haunted quality that suggests they're running from something. That is often what unprocessed childhood pain looks like in adulthood. And here is something that'll make you rethink everything. Your brain doesn't distinguish between emotional wounds and physical ones. To your nervous system, Both register as threats that need to be addressed immediately. This explains why someone can crave a substance as intensely as someone gasps for air when they're suffocating. It is not about wanting to get high. It is about desperately wanting to feel safe. When I first encountered this research, it completely shattered my understanding of addiction. Suddenly, all those stories I'd heard, successful people spiraling seemingly out of nowhere, individuals with everything going for them, throwing it all away, finally made sense. They weren't lacking discipline or moral fiber. They were carrying invisible wounds that had never healed properly. Hidden beliefs whispered by their younger selves. I am not good enough. I am unlovable. Something is fundamentally wrong with me. Addiction becomes the temporary volume control for these brutal internal voices. And for a while, it actually works. That is the dangerous part. The relief feels real because, in a way, it is real. But the problem is that it is temporary. The pain always returns, often with interest, and the cycle deepens. Now, here is where I want you to pause and consider something profound. If childhood trauma can wire the brain toward addiction, does that mean people are forever trapped by their past? Are we all just victims of our early experiences with no hope of real change? The answer is far more complex and infinitely more hopeful than you might expect. But before we dive into that hope, let's go even deeper into how trauma actually gets stored in your body. Because this is where the real magic of understanding begins. Memories aren't just stories filed away in your head like books on a shelf. They're living, breathing sensations stored throughout your entire nervous system. That is why you can feel your stomach drop when someone raises their voice in a particular way, or why a certain smell can instantly transport you back to childhood without any conscious effort on your part. These aren't random quirks. They're biological responses to stored trauma. Your body remembers what your mind might have forgotten or tried to suppress. This creates what psychologists call emotional flashbacks, moments when an adult suddenly feels the helplessness, fear, or confusion of their younger self, even if they can't consciously connect it to any specific memory. In these states, the urge to escape can feel absolutely overwhelming. It is not about wanting to feel good. It is about desperately wanting to stop feeling bad. But here is something revolutionary that is happening in psychology right now. Addiction isn't just about substances like alcohol or drugs anymore. We're recognizing that anything that provides temporary relief from emotional pain can become addictive if the underlying wound is deep enough. Work, achievement, social media, shopping, exercise, even relationships. They can all become escape routes when someone is running from unresolved pain. This is why some people seem to jump from one addiction to another, never quite understanding why nothing seems to stick. The substance or behavior isn't the real issue. It is the pain underneath that is driving the bus. This understanding has given birth to what is called trauma-informed therapy, and it is changing everything about how we approach healing. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with you?" the question becomes, "What happened to you?" That shift in perspective, from judgment to curiosity, from shame to compassion, literally changes the brain's capacity to heal. Let me share something that'll illustrate this perfectly. Researchers conducted a groundbreaking study where they looked at people who had experienced multiple forms of childhood adversity. Things like emotional neglect, household instability, or witnessing conflict. What they found was staggering. The more adverse childhood experiences someone had, the exponentially higher their risk became for addiction later in life. Not slightly higher, exponentially higher. Each trauma essentially adds another layer of pain that the brain must find a way to cope with. But here is what is beautiful about this research. It is not deterministic. Having trauma doesn't doom someone to addiction. It simply means their brain learned certain survival strategies that might need to be updated for adult life. Remember that child staring at the ceiling. That child wasn't broken. They were adapting brilliantly to circumstances beyond their control. Some children become perfectionists, constantly chasing approval. Others become rebels, acting out to get attention. Some retreat inward, creating rich inner worlds to escape outer chaos. These aren't character flaws, they're survival adaptations. And later in life, when these strategies no longer serve, or when they transform into addictive patterns, it is not because the person is weak, it is because they're still using childhood tools to handle adult problems. This reframe is crucial. because it moves us from seeing people as broken to seeing them as survivors. And when we see someone as a survivor, rather than a victim, we start looking for their strength instead of focusing on their wounds. Which brings us to the most hopeful part of this entire story. If trauma can wire the brain toward vulnerability, healing can rewire it toward resilience. The same neuroplasticity that once created the problem can also create the solution, but healing requires something that most people underestimate: safety. Think about it. Addiction thrives in isolation, in shame, in the suffocating silence of, "I can't tell anyone about this." Healing, on the other hand, requires connection. The nervous system that was wounded in relationship can only truly heal in relationship. This might mean therapy, where someone finally experiences being heard without judgment. It might mean a trusted friendship where vulnerability is met with acceptance instead of rejection. It might even mean learning to become your own source of safety, offering yourself the words of comfort you never heard as a child. When this sense of safety begins to develop, something remarkable happens. The brain starts to calm down. Cortisol levels decrease. The hypervigilant stress response that has been running in the background for decades finally gets the message that the danger has passed. And when that happens, the desperate cravings for escape begin to lose their grip. Here is where the science gets even more exciting. Practices like mindfulness, meditation, and even simple deep breathing don't just help you feel better in the moment. They literally rewire your brain at the structural level. The prefrontal cortex, your brain's executive center, responsible for decision making and emotional regulation, becomes stronger and more active. The amygdala, your brain's alarm system that triggers fight or flight responses, becomes less reactive. And those dopamine pathways that were hijacked by substances, they can actually begin to respond again to ordinary pleasures. The warmth of sunlight on your skin, the sound of genuine laughter, the satisfaction of creating something meaningful. These simple joys, which trauma can make nearly impossible to access, slowly become available again. Healing isn't about erasing the past or pretending trauma never happened. It is about giving your nervous system new experiences of safety, joy, and connection that literally rewrite the old programming. But here is something most people don't understand about this process. Healing doesn't happen in one dramatic breakthrough moment like you see in movies. It happens slowly, almost invisibly, in small choices, repeated over time, choosing to sit with uncomfortable feelings for 30 seconds instead of immediately numbing them, choosing to reach out to someone when you usually withdraw, choosing to speak to yourself with the same kindness you'd show a good friend. These moments might feel insignificant, but to your nervous system, they're revolutionary. Each one is like a single stitch, slowly repairing fabric that was torn long ago. You know what is absolutely beautiful about people who've walked through addiction and come out the other side? They often develop this incredible depth of wisdom and empathy. It is as if the very thing that once threatened to destroy them becomes their greatest teacher. They can sense unspoken pain in others. They can offer comfort without judgment because they know what it feels like to be judged. They become living proof that transformation is possible. Even when everything seems hopeless, the wound literally becomes the gift. The weakness becomes the strength. There is something almost poetic about that transformation. But let's be honest, this path isn't easy. Addiction can feel like an anchor that keeps dragging you back down just when you think you've finally surfaced. This is where self-compassion becomes absolutely critical. Most people stuck in cycles of addiction think, "I failed again. I must be fundamentally broken." But the truth is, every slip, every struggle, every perceived failure is actually part of the rewiring process. Think of it like learning to walk again after a serious injury. You fall, you stumble, your legs shake, but each attempt is strengthening muscles that will eventually carry you with confidence. Healing from trauma works the same way. It is not about perfection. It is about persistence. Now, here is something fascinating that I want you to consider. People who successfully overcome addiction rarely do it through willpower alone. They do it when they discover something bigger than the addiction itself. A sense of purpose, a passion, a reason to keep moving forward that is more compelling than the temporary relief substances provide. Meaning is the antidote to emptiness. And when someone connects with their sense of purpose, whether through art, service, faith, relationships, or simply the commitment to live authentically. They no longer need external substances to fill the internal void. The void begins to fill itself. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, wrote something profound. Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. This truth applies powerfully here. Childhood trauma often robs people of their sense of worth, their sense of belonging, their sense of why they matter. Addiction becomes a placeholder for these missing pieces. But when someone rediscovers meaning, when they reconnect with the part of themselves that was buried but never destroyed, the addiction begins to lose its power. Because what the brain was searching for all along wasn't really a substance, it was connection, purpose, and love. Let me paint you a picture of what this transformation can look like. Imagine that same child from the beginning of our story, the one sitting alone, staring at the ceiling, carrying that invisible weight of confusion and pain. Now, imagine them as an adult, sitting quietly in a safe space, maybe with tears in their eyes, finally telling their story to someone who doesn't turn away or try to fix them, someone who simply witnesses their pain with compassion. In that moment, something profound shifts. The child within finally feels seen. The adult feels lighter, and the cycle that may have been running for decades begins to break. This isn't fantasy. This is what healing looks like in real life, for countless people who find the courage to face their pain instead of running from it. But here is the final piece that makes this entire story even more significant. Healing from trauma and addiction isn't just about the individual, it is about generations. Research on intergenerational trauma shows that wounds from one generation often pass down to the next. Not just through learned behaviors, but actually through biological changes that can affect gene expression. Children of parents with unresolved trauma can inherit stress patterns in their own nervous systems before they're even born. But here is the incredible flip side. Healing can also be passed down. When one person decides to break the cycle, to face their pain instead of numbing it, to choose healing over hiding, they don't just change their own life trajectory, they change the trajectory of everyone who comes after them, their children, their children, their children, and beyond. The courage of one person to heal can literally reshape the future of an entire family line. That is the power we're talking about here. This isn't just personal recovery, it is generational transformation. So where does all of this leave us? Childhood trauma can indeed create vulnerability to addiction. That much is clear from the research. But the story doesn't end there. The narrative isn't locked in stone. The same brain that once desperately sought escape can learn to seek presence. The same heart that felt shattered can discover incredible resilience. And the same life that once seemed doomed to repeat destructive patterns can become a beacon of hope for others still lost in the darkness. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, maybe it is because something in this story feels personal. Maybe you recognize yourself in these patterns, or maybe you see someone you love struggling with these invisible wounds. If that is true, I want you to hold on to this one crucial truth. Addiction is not the opposite of willpower. Addiction is often the language of unprocessed pain. And healing, real, lasting healing, is the language of love. Every step towards self-compassion, every moment of genuine connection, every act of courage in facing what hurts. These aren't small gestures, they're revolutionary acts that prove something profound about human nature. No matter how deep the wound, no matter how far the fall, the human spirit was never designed to stay broken. We were designed to heal, to grow, to transform even our deepest pain into wisdom and strength. Here is my final question for you. What if the scars you carry, whether your own or those of someone you care about, aren't signs of permanent damage? What if they're actually maps? Maps that can guide you not just out of the darkness, but into a life that is richer, deeper, and more meaningful than you ever imagined possible. That is the ultimate paradox of healing. It doesn't erase the past or pretend trauma never happened. Instead, it transforms that pain into something powerful. Wisdom, empathy, resilience, and an unshakable knowing that if you can survive your worst moments, you can handle whatever comes next. And in that transformation, in that alchemy of turning wounds into wisdom, lies the kind of freedom that no substance, no behavior, no external thing could ever provide. The freedom to finally come home to yourself.